Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask you to like us, leave comments, subscribe, and maybe even support us on Patreon. All those things help keep us on the air. And just a reminder that our trip to Bali is full speed ahead. And if you're interested in continuing your spiritual journey in a very spiritual place, contact me. You can go to our website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com, click on the Bali link, and you'll find out all about it. So today's guest is kicking off season 13 for us. And it's just amazing that Beatty Carmichael has been able to schedule some time with us. We're very excited to have him with us. He's a health and addiction expert who specializes in exposing the hidden spiritual roots behind conditions like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, addiction, and chronic pain. After 25 years in business, he uncovered a disruptive truth that many issues we label as mental illness or chronic conditions aren't medical at all. They're spiritual torments, misdiagnosed as disease. By identifying and removing these spiritual oppressors, he's helped over 1,000 people experience lasting freedom, often within 24 hours, from struggles that therapy and medicine couldn't resolve. His method consistently delivers a nearly 90% success rate, even in long-term or treatment-resistant cases. He outlines this simple step-by-step process in his book, The Prayer of Freedom, available at theprayeroffreedombook.com. Today, he'll share why so many people stay stuck and how lasting freedom begins once the misdiagnosis is exposed and the true spiritual root is removed. But before he does that, we're going to have him reveal his spiritual journey from childhood until now. Beatty, the microphone's all yours.
Well, thank you. My spiritual journey, it's been really interesting. I actually grew up in a Christian church, but a very legalistic one. And what I mean by that is some of the old ancient Bible texts say, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. There's no love in it. And that was kind of the feeling that I had at my church. It was also, they didn't really believe in a lot of things that I would call outside of the natural cause and effect, meaning that God can sometimes intervene, or this higher power. I call him God. Other people call this entity maybe the higher power or pure love, okay? And that he can intervene, but he usually often never does. So that was where I began my spiritual journey. And then I stayed there for most of my adult life until about 10 years ago, things started to shift. I started to have this deep impression. So I come from 7 generations of medical doctors. So healing is actually in my DNA. And I've spent the last 25 years in business developing systems that deliver predictable results, which fit perfectly in this church environment that nothing happens outside of the normal cause and effect. And then this spiritual journey of mine changed. About 9 or 10 years ago, I was pulled into healing. And what I discovered shocked me. I started to discover that there's a lot more on the spiritual side than my church was ever teaching and even believed or understood. It was really fascinating, believe it or not, that as I started to try to understand what was going on, because part of the spiritual journey is God led me to simply go pray for people. I mean, just ask Him to heal someone. And so I would walk up to people. I started going out to Walmart on weekends because it seemed to be what I call a target-rich environment, if we want to use a military term. People who were struggling with all kinds of issues but didn't know what to do. And and at that time, I started to see this creator God actually work in their lives. And I saw things like glaucoma leave, anxiety and depression, arthritis, all kinds of things that medical science says is impossible and is incurable. So I started to take a deeper dive, trying to understand this spiritually, because I knew something was happening outside of the physical realm. And in doing that, I went to those ancient Bible texts that my church used to go to, and I started to read it with a different pair of glasses. I don't know if you've ever seen this. I'm sure you have, Bob. But when you're so determined that it says only one thing, then you miss everything that contradicts your original thought. So I went back into this, and I decided it was literally a purposeful, deliberate decision. I reject everything I've been told is truth. And I'm now going to see what this says, and I'm going to be open to anything it says. And I started to see spiritual truths that I totally missed. I started to see the spiritual truths of engaging with this Creator God, what He wanted in our lives. He put a conscience in our lives that guides us in right and wrong. This is why we never have to be told that we did something wrong, but we feel guilty. We never have to be told that we did something good. We help someone out and we feel really good in ourselves. So all of these things are happening in that spiritual part of us. And that took me into a really deep dive. And you might uh, catch interest with this. So the church I grew up in, and I'll call it the Protestant church, believes very dogmatically. If you don't believe the way they believe, then you don't have this what the church calls eternal life, what others call nirvana, or others call pure love, or pure peace, pure light, high vibration. All of these words kind of pointing in the same direction. And and so as I started to pursue the spiritual side of it, not the Christian side, but the spiritual side of what's going on, what I started to realize is how limiting this side over here from the old church was, and how all of these truths actually point to the same spot. Because if there is a creator God, then He loves all of us, and He's pulling all of us in the direction of love, of higher vibration, of light, and everyone has their own terms for it, but it's all going the same direction. And this is the other part. I started to realize that the issues that we deal with from a physical and mental type of framework almost all have a spiritual root side of it that He has already laid out in these ancient writings that tell us how to get healed. And so I started to apply those. I started to study them and apply them, and started to teach people how to approach this higher power in the way that He wants us to approach Him, and on their own, without my involvement, but just teaching these processes. I'm seeing, as you mentioned, statistically 87 to 90% success rate in people getting rid of things like anxiety and depression, bipolar disorder, emotional trauma, chronic pain, addiction, glaucoma, all kinds of things, because it removes the spiritual root. And the way I like to describe for a lot of people, and this is the journey that I had, is I started to see people with all these items that they were stuck with. And growing up in the medical community, it had medicine was the solution, right? Or surgery was the solution. But my father-in-law, I think he had it much better than anyone else. He had it right. He said that our health is based on three things. It's mental, physical, and spiritual. And he would always analyze someone within those three categories to identify, is this a mental, physical, or spiritual issue? What I've been learning as I've been going this process is so much of what we deal with actually has spiritual roots, but the medical system has taken the spiritual out of it, and that's why they're not effective very much on many things because they're treating it either as mental or physical. But if you treat the wrong course because you're looking at symptoms but not causes, then you'll miss the solution. And that's why, like just the other day, a friend came up to me and he said, Beatty, can you help me? I'm dealing with anxiety for about a year and a half. The doctor says it's going to be with me the rest of my life because it's incurable. And he put me on some medicines. I said, oh, anxiety is easy to get rid of. I said, when did it begin? He said, last May, a year ago, when my wife had a breast exam and we found lumps, and I got really afraid. I said, well, that's it. Because you got afraid, right? Here's the spiritual truth from this higher power of love. Perfect love casts out fear. But because you fear, then you actually rejected this Creator God's perfect love. That opens a doorway spiritually for an entity, a low vibration entity of fear, to amplify anxiety in your life. So I led him to simply go back and confess that he was wrong to be afraid, that he should instead be following this perfect love. And in just a few moments, his anxiety literally went from a 4 to a 0, completely gone. And that's the spiritual journey I've been on.
So I'd like to take you back to Walmart.
Okay.
Because
I would
I'm
love to go back to Walmart. Those
yeah.
are my favorite times.
I'm trying to picture, all right, there you are standing outside of Walmart and
Going inside.
oh, inside. Okay.
I'd walk up to people and say, "Hey, I'm out praying for people. Is there anything I can pray for you on?" Literally, one after another, just looking for people who wanted prayer. And then if that prayer had something to do with healing, then I would apply this process.
Okay, so that was your approach. Now,
Yeah.
you say that you were called to do this. So in what form did that take place? That you heard a voice in the night, or it came
That's a
from
great
your
question.
intuition, or where'd that come from?
I would say in that language, it came from intuition. In my language, I would say that there was just a burden on my heart that I felt God wanting me to go pray for people. Here was what happened. So keep in mind, I'm at this church that doesn't believe that this higher power does anything unique, right? He
Uh,
can, but he doesn't. So I started to watch a docu-series on how this creator God is moving in people's lives today. And in that docu-series, I saw some guy with a camera, video camera, walking around behind a couple of guys. I would just walk up to people in the public sector and pray for them, and they would be healed. And I never saw anything like that. And it seemed so real, I didn't think it was staged. And so I just consumed this 3 series docu-series on it. And and I just felt this deep, I don't know if you ever felt this burden, but like I'll share something personal. I used to, back in high school, I worked in the repair department of a very high-end jewelry store. And I saw this gorgeous watch come through. And it was the most unique, amazing thing I'd ever seen. And in the back of my mind, I've said, oh, I would love that. Then fast forward probably 20 years, 15, 20 years. Yeah, right about 20 years. My wife and I are in Peru, and I go to this high-end jewelry store and I see this beautiful, expensive watch. And it was almost identical to what I'd seen back in the jewelry store. And I bought it pretty much on the spot. I mean, it was like thousands of dollars. And my wife said, Beatty, I've never seen you make a decision, like that. I said, but I've been looking for this all along. I didn't know I was looking, but as soon as I saw it, it's like I couldn't get it out of my mind and I had to have it. Does that make sense, Bob?
yeah, sure.
And that's what happened when I started to see that stuff in the docu series. Back to my healing DNA. Oh, almost 200 years of medical doctors healing people, and watching that, it awakened something in my heart that it was missing. And it said, I want this. And I just dug in deep and said, I've got to get it. It was that type of a burden. So it wasn't like intuition. It was just like something awakened within me that says, this is what I want to do.
Do you recall the name of the docuseries?
Father of Lights. That was one of the episodes. Um, uh, Something about Holy Spirit. And I forget the other one. Finger of God, maybe, but Father of Lights, I think, is the one that stands out the most. It was really powerful.
It sounds that way because it sounds like it changed your entire life.
It awakened, yeah, it awakened
Yeah,
my entire life. And then that was the catalyst that caused me to dig deep and start to pursue what is this burden I'm feeling? And then it actually took me 6 months before I prayed for my first person because I was kind of like scared. I don't want to go up and talk,
right.
how do I do this? And the biggest issue is I didn't think God wanted to heal people. And I had to come to grips with, does he actually want to heal people? And so as I started to go through this, I realized that he does. He doesn't want us sick, but there's consequences to our actions. And he wants us to reverse the consequences. And that's where all this came about.
Yeah. So this process, uh, as you did this, I guess my mind goes back to say when Edgar Casey used to be able to diagnose and heal people, and had the medical community sending him cases where they couldn't figure out what the problem was or they really couldn't solve it. Uh, and he always knew that he wasn't doing the healing, that he was just a vessel for this healing. And I
Right.
assume because of the language that you use, uh, that you have an understanding that you're not there healing people. You're you're just the vessel,
Right.
right?
I'm just the vessel.
Okay. Now, what happened with him is that after people got word and word spread that he was doing this, suddenly he was inundated with hundreds and hundreds of requests, and that was pre-internet. That was before,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
word spread rather slowly, uh, and he never charged for these healings. Uh, the message that he got was that this isn't something he was to make a profit from. So luckily, there were people who supported him in his work, so that he was able to live, because eventually he was totally consumed by just doing this work. So I am curious about this piece of your journey and what has happened since people got wind of the fact that you were capable of doing this. Uh,
So I had a lot of
yeah,
people call me up, say, help me, help me.
right.
And like one lady, I started teaching at an addiction recovery center for women. It's a facility here in my city, and it's a residential facility. They house over 500 women. So I started to teach there and teach these women how to get free of addictions. And this is the cool part. This isn't a plug for the book, but to a plug for is it the word efficacy of this process? Um, when I was when God told me to write a book and describe how this works, I gave the key part of the book is chapter 12, which is it's a list of where we have these open doors in our spiritual life that we can open. And the specific process to start closing them down. Each door has a slightly different process, and it's pretty robust. It's not like a one size fits all. There's some stuff there. So I was teaching 3 classes at this addiction recovery center, and I gave that chapter, chapter 12, to all three of those all three classes of my students, and I said, I'll pay you money if you'll simply complete this process and report to me what happens, because I wanted to test it. And that's where I was able to measure statistically 87% of those ladies who went through this process on their own, it all completely disappeared. And what started to then happen, Bob, is, I'm trying to remember your original question. I was going someplace that tied into. Please remind me the question.
Well, it was a
I got
matter
lost in my
of
own
being
thought.
inundated with
Yeah,
requests
being inundated.
once
Thank
the
you.
word
Thank
gets
you.
out.
Yeah. So once the word started getting out, people, I realized that I couldn't handle it all on my own. So this goes actually back to my business days. So in business, I have a small business. It's a marketing business, and it's very manually intensive. And it's sort of like my dad, right? My dad was a vascular surgeon, very manually intensive. He could not scale himself beyond his hours.
Mhm.
But I've been focused on how do you take a process and scale it beyond your ability. So in business, I was always creating the process. I call them a standard operating procedure, but where you develop a systematic approach that you once you break something down to all the individual steps, you can hire anyone to follow those steps exactly, and it's a perfect execution of it. So what I started to do when people started to reach out to me all the time is that's when I decided to put this in a book, because I realized I can't reach all those people, and I can't spend hours of my day doing that and abandoning everything else. So that's what led to my book, The Prayer of Freedom. And now with the Prayer of Freedom, like I just did a show, and it just released 2 days ago, I think, on YouTube. Uh, and it's a hot, this whole idea of healing is really big. A lot of people struggling. And so that one show has already produced like over 600 people who bought the book. It was like 70,000 views in 2 days. And what hits me is I don't have to work with each of them. And because of that, I can help more people. It's a cheap book, it's a step-by-step process, and it's doing things that doctors have said is impossible. I mean, I remember one of these ladies at the Addiction Recovery Center. Uh, was she had heavy trauma, like at 5 and 6 years old. I think she was raped or molested by her uncle and her dad. So, you know anything about psychological trauma, that stays with you forever. By 14, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, and borderline personality disorder. By the time I met her at the Addiction Recovery Center, this was just like 2 years ago. She was on 400 milligrams of Seroquel. She was on a day. She was on Buspirone, Zoloft, and sleep meds. And the doctors had said, you're going to be on this the rest of your life because this is incurable. She went through this process. She said, literally, the next day after going through that, I woke up and I was totally calm. I had none of these issues. I went to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, if you feel that good, you don't need the meds. And she's been off her meds ever since. And so what's happening is I could not have led her through that personally because I'm teaching these classes and I just don't have time. Every lady there has deep needs. But because she can go through this process on her own, all these ladies are getting free. The people that are around the world are getting free because now it's not me. I just figured out the spiritual process to make this work, and now they can do it on their own. And so that's how I'm pulling out of that mode and saying, okay, I don't do personal stuff anymore. Get the book. If you need help afterwards, I'll engage. But do the book first because it has it all.
Yeah. So my understanding, having read the book myself, uh, is that this is not a prayer that you made up. It's a prayer that you
No.
discovered. So could you talk about that a little bit, where it came from and why you decided this is the one of all the prayers that I could
Yeah.
do, this is the one I want to do?
Let me ask you a question, and you can cut this out if you want to, but I have two answers to your question. I can give you the real candid how I discovered this gets into some really dark stuff as I worked with people in dark areas that had a lot of huge spiritual entity torments going on in their lives that would drive them, that would manifest through them. How deep do you want me to get on answering your
I,
question?
I would I would say get real. I mean, go all the way
Okay.
because uh, many of the people I've interviewed talk about the dark night of the soul, and that if
Okay.
it it took hitting rock bottom, being in the bathroom, falling to the floor, crying out, "I can't do this on my own. I need help." And from then on, they've found the path and the way back to the light. So, darkness
All right.
is
So
something, our shadow selves is they're all it's there for every one of us. So go for it.
great. Well, then I'll be completely candid and transparent, and hopefully I don't blow some of the listeners out on this one. Let me set the stage real quick. We live in two realms. We're in a physical realm. This is my body. And we're in a spiritual realm. That's where our soul is. We can't see the spiritual realm. Some people have a gifting that they can see in the spiritual realm, but most of us, including me, we can't see it. And to understand what I'm about to share, you really have to grasp that there is the spiritual realm that we live in that we don't even understand how it impacts us. In the physical realm, we have people that don't like us. Like, let's say the bully in school, and the bully in school will just come up and hit us or push us or laugh at us or trip us just to be mean. Well, in the spiritual realm, we have bullies there as well. And they're actually spiritual entities. The way I would describe it is low vibration, dark energy spirits. Okay. The Bible texts call these entities spirits, and other people recognize them as dark energy or as low vibration, but they're all the same. The key is they are entities, and about half of them that deal with us actually are just like us. They have a mind, a will, emotions, and what they're doing. Okay, the difference. The ancient Bible text. This comes out of a passage in the Bible called Ephesians 6:12. And in an old version of the Bible called the Living Bible, it says it this way: our battle is not against people of flesh and blood, but against persons without bodies. So the way to understand this is I am the person of who I am is my soul. My soul is my mind, will, emotions, personality, and memory. My body is what I move around in this physical realm, but who I really am is actually living in the spiritual realm. So that's who I am. I'm a soul with a body. But a but this enemy that we're up against a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of the deeper, darker, heavier things in our lives is a person like a soul without a body. It was never like a human person. I don't want to describe that, but it's a spiritual entity and it's looking to attack us. And the way it attacks us is this higher power, I call him God. When he creates man with a conscience. And in that conscience, this God writes his standards of right and wrong. Okay? And when we do good, then the conscience says, well done, and you feel happy and elated. I help someone. Someone's needing some help, and I give them some money. I pick them up off the ground. I help do something, and it changes their lives, and we feel really good about that. And when I go out and I steal from someone, or I'm getting really selfish and I take something from someone who really needs it, I feel guilty. And I know I did wrong. The way that I know I did right or wrong is this conscience that God placed in us is used as a compass to guide us. Said in a different way, when I do dark energy or low vibration things, I feel bad. When I do high vibration things, I feel good. The way this works, and this is the pattern I started to see, is when we do a low vibration activity, what the ancient Bible text calls a sin, which is simply something that God doesn't like us to do, that we violate that conscience, then it opens up a legal right, a legal process in the spiritual realm for one of these dark energy, low vibration spirits to come in and and bully us. It's normally a one-to-one relationship, meaning if I blow up in anger at somebody and I get really angry, then this dark energy spirit of anger comes in and simply amplifies anger in my life. If I get afraid, like my friend Bobby the other day, uh, uh, he got afraid when his wife was diagnosed with lumps in her breast. So now that fear, it was a really big fear. It opened up a doorway that now this dark energy spirit of fear comes in and amplifies fear. Other times we can get involved with the occult, dark stuff like playing with a Ouija board or getting into witchcraft or things of that sort where we're trying to do things in the spiritual realm that's kind of against God. That's probably the best way to describe it. Those open up doorways. So what led me in this process to understand this, how this works, is one of the things God led me into was working with people who had these dark spirits driving them to the point that those spirits would actually manifest in their lives and take over their body. So we see this in horror movies, right? Where someone's normal and then all of a sudden they get this intense violence about them and they do these horrible things. So I started to deal with people with those type of spirits. They weren't always violent, but they were always spirits that were causing deep pain, deep mental issues. And the first time that I engaged with this, it was with a lady named Alexa. She called me up. She was one of the ladies I met at Walmart and prayed for her a year or two earlier. And she said, would you help me? I have demons and I need to get them out. So that's what the Bible text calls these spirits. It calls them demons or unclean spirits. So I went over to her home and literally they started to manifest. They started to take over her body. The eyes changed, started to look at me, speak with a different voice and personality. And I was able to interrogate and ask them basically, here's the concept. You find out what is their legal right to be there because the Creator God doesn't want them there. But something we did that violated God's rules opened up a doorway that gave him what I call a legal right in order to be in that person's life. So I would ask that spirit, what is your legal right to be there? And 100% of the time, it was always a violation of God's standard. What the Bible calls sin. What others would call, it's always a dark, low vibration activity that we did. And so then I would get that person to confess that they were wrong doing that. Basically confessing to God, hey, okay, I confess it was wrong. I should not have done that. Please now remove that legal right. And then now God takes away that legal right and you can command that dark energy spirit to leave and it leaves. So when I started to see this pattern over and over again, it started to hit really deep in me that these issues were caused because we opened a door and all we had to do is confess that we were wrong with it, and then you can get that spirit out. Um, so, like, for example, that spirit of fear in Bobby. My own daughter came to me a year ago. She was 23 at the time. And she said, Dad, can you help me get rid of my night terrors? And I didn't know she'd had night terrors. I said, sure, that's easy. When did it start? I said, when was the first time you became afraid? She said, I was probably about 3 or 4 years old watching this TV show with my cousin. I said, well, that's probably where it came in. We opened a door and it stayed with you because you never commanded it to go out. So I led her into confessing to this Creator God, I was wrong to be afraid because that rejects your love. And I break all negative spiritual connections that may be with my cousin. Because sometimes what will happen is these spirits will work through someone else to cause you, invite you into something where you do something wrong. And that's also where the legal right can be. And then after she did that, I had her say, and now in the authority of this Creator God, I command the spirit of fear to leave me. That was it. The whole thing was like 3 minutes, maybe. She's never had night terrors ever since. I mean, literally, they just disappeared. Um, tell you a really interesting story that ties into this. Sometimes people have what I'll call a demonic visit, usually at night. It's where maybe a dark, shadowy figure appears in your house or in your room. You'll hear something move across the room floor, and you know no one's out there. And sometimes they become very real. For my son, they were very real. And this is real interesting. So this happened in his senior year of high school, 2 and 3 times a week at night, usually like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning while he's sleeping. He would wake up with this demonic, dark spirit appearing in his room that would actually take physical action against him, choke him, move him around. One time I think it lifted the bed up or moved him off the bed. I mean, so it was a physical manifestation of this stuff, and it scared him to death. And he kept praying and begging, Almighty God, would you stop this? And watch this. God said no every single time for 6 months. And I was asking him, I said, his name is Beatty Jr. I said, Beatty, when did it stop? He said, well, I asked God a different question after about 6 months. Rather than begging him and asking him to stop it, I asked him, how do I stop it? Which is a completely different question. See, just a side note, it seems like God usually answers our questions, but doesn't volunteer what we're not asking. So he wants us to pursue. And God said, just ignore them. So that night, they appeared. At the foot of his bed, he sees this dark, shadowy figure standing there. And over in the doorway on the right, he saw this little hoodie girl, like you see in the horror movies, with no face, just kind of floating across the room towards him. And he took this creator God at his word, and he looked at both of them and said, are you serious? Is that all you can do? That is so corny. And he turned over and went back to bed and slept. And they disappeared and never came back. So here's the message. What was happening for the first 6 months is he was afraid of them. And because of fear, right, that perfect love casts out fear, because of fear, they had a continued right to come in and scare him. But when he obeyed and rejected that fear and renounced it, then it took away their power to be there. So that's the pattern that I started to see. And by guiding people into simply identifying these things and reversing it, confessing I'm wrong, there's a passage in the Bible text, the reference is James 5:16, but it's talking about if someone is sick, here's what you do. And it says very clearly, confess your sin and you shall be healed. And so I started to apply that approach, leading people to ask this Creator God, does my issue have this sin, a dark activity that I did that I need to confess that I was wrong? And by leading people into doing that, they're getting free at 87 to 90% of a lot of these issues.
Yeah. So I found this part of your book fascinating when you discuss the fact that someone can pray for somebody else and help them. For instance, a father for a son or a grandfather or, a generational prayer. So how did you discover that? And how did you decide this is this is something that people should know about?
Yeah, so in marketing, there's a word called research. So in English, like English literature, if you were to take what someone else does and use it in your own work, it's called plagiarism. But in marketing, it's called research. You find what someone else does, you do it yourself, and it's called
Yeah.
research.
Okay.
So in research, I heard the story of a pastor friend, uh, not a friend, but one of the stories in the book. I think his name is Robert, and his son's name is Andy in the book. Um, but the pastor was praying for his son who had manic depression for 2 years and nothing changed. And then Creator God said, bring your son into my courtroom in heaven and simply confess his sins uh, on his behalf, what the Bible calls repent. So he did, and instantly his son was delivered from depression. So I started to say, oh, is there a pattern here that can be applied elsewhere? So I literally started to test that with other people when opportunities arose, and I found that it was true. And here's the concept. I want to take you back a little bit into the Jewish nation back a couple of thousand years ago. And in the Jewish nation, you have what's called the 12 tribes of Israel. One of those tribes was the tribe of Levi, and they were basically the priestly tribe. So the way it worked is you would have a temple, and the temple is where, in those days, God would dwell. And then you have out in the fields and throughout the land, you have the Israelites, and they're working the land and they're working the herds. And when they do things wrong, they're going to bring a sacrifice to God. So they bring something to the temple, like let's say it's an animal or some grain or offering. They give it to the priest, and the priest actually takes it to God. In other words, the priest is acting as a mediator, almost like if you think about it as an attorney. The priest is representing that Israelite who did something wrong and is bringing that Israelite's confession of sin before God. That's the pattern. It's the same thing we find in our own legal system. If I do something wrong and the prosecuting attorney is going to accuse me, then I'll hire an attorney to represent me. I don't speak. The attorney speaks on my behalf, and it carries legal weight. That's the same process. I find that this whole spiritual realm is very similar to the physical realm in that there's laws, there's legal process. And so when I saw that thing happen with the pastor, I started to see this concept of the attorney-client representation. And I started to test it, and it started to work. I started to go back into the Bible text to see if there are examples of that, and you start to see it throughout the Bible, but you have to look at it. You have to know what you're looking for. So that's how I saw it. And just to give our listeners the benefit of this, what I'm finding is a lot of times the things that we do create issues in our life, but someone else can help us get rid of those issues by confessing to God on our behalf that we were wrong. Let me tell you two stories because this is really powerful. That lady I was mentioning who was abused and probably molested and raped at early age, um, she also has at the addiction center two daughters, 1 and 5 years old, and they're dealing with heavy asthma. At 1 and 3 years old, they're already on inhalers and using up the inhaler faster than the doctor prescribes because it's really that bad. Ashley is the lady's name. She said the morning I I went through this and woke up the next morning and I was completely healed of all my stuff. It's all disappeared. She said I also noticed that my daughters no longer had asthma. They never asked for the inhaler. They've stopped using them, and they can run around and be active without any lung issues. And so what was happening is there was something in the spiritual realm that was tied to the mother that impacted the daughters. And so when the mother went through and confessed her sins, it made an impact on the daughters. And then I have another friend, he's about my age, and he's been separated relationally with his adult son for the last 20 years. 15 or 20 years. They'll get together at family celebration, family events, and it always blows up in hard anger. There's just this deep bitterness. And I led, my friend's name is John, I led him to go through this on behalf of his son. And when he did, everything in that relationship calmed down, and now they're best friends. They love each other. It's all those issues in their life totally disappeared because the father prayed on behalf of his son. My dad did the same thing with my brother. My brother had a lot of issues emotionally with his mother, financially in their life, all kinds of things that he would just keep losing a job, never get paid much. So I led my elderly father, at that time he was 87 years old, just to confess things that I was aware of with my brother. Within 3 weeks, he gets this unexpectedly large pay raise, so now he can buy a house. He'd been living at my parents' home for 16 years with his family of six. The relationship, he used to always blow up at my mother all the time, and my mother wouldn't even engage with him, and she was on pins and needles. And now all that's gone. I mean, literally within overnight, all that tension was gone, and now my brother would deal lovingly with my mother, and it's just the sweetest relationship. And all kinds of things changed at the moment my father did that. So I call it research. Started testing it out. It works, and here we are.
Yeah. There's, I don't know, something special about these events in people's lives that are so personal. Like you've mentioned family members frequently
Yes.
as being as having benefited from this process, so that the reality for you is that I know this works because it not only worked for me, it works for the people I love. It works for the people around me. It's personal. It's
Yeah,
not just out there somewhere.
it is. And in fact, I like to read. So I literally, just before I got on this call, um, I got an email from a friend that I actually did a show with. And he wrote me, his name is Luke, and this is what he said. This is what's so cool about this. He said, it's now been probably about 6 weeks since we did that Zoom call interview, and I've had no neck pain ever since then. He said, ever since that day, I haven't had the neck and shoulder issues that have been plaguing me for about 5 years, ever since I was in my 20s. I haven't been able to lie on my side more than 10 minutes without extreme discomfort the entire next day. Last night, I slept on my side all night long, and I'm just fine today. It's amazing. I never actually thought God would heal me of that. I thought it was just the consequences of bad posture. So I'm getting things like this all the time. And it's nothing I'm doing. I'm just saying, hey, follow this process. And these miraculous things are just happening in their lives. And the way I like to describe it is, when we do what God says to do, then He does what He says He's going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, there's, spiritually, it's like that voice is always there. It's a matter of
Yeah.
tuning into it. Do you listen to it or don't you listen to it? And it's a choice. That's one thing. Free will and choice is a great thing, but it can get us into a lot of trouble too.
It sure can.
Yeah.
But that's part of the spice of life.
Yeah. Uh, we're nearing the end of our time here, and I know that there there are two things. One is an outro question that you would like me to ask, and one is how I always end my program, which
Why don't
is
you end it with
to allow
yours?
you to lead the audience with a few words of wisdom. So we can combine that with what is the one thing that you'd like people to remember from this
Now,
conversation?
uh, I think the one thing to remember is the most important thing. As my journey led me this direction, I started to see people that were stuck in pain, mental anguish, relationship problems, or maybe it was their loved ones that were stuck, and it creates this deep stress and anxiety on you because you want so much to help them, and it seems like there's no solution. You take them to the doctors and the psychologists and psychiatrists, and everyone says, it's incurable. Just learn to live with it. And what I have found is that many of those things are curable. Many of those things you don't have to live with. You just have to look in the spiritual realm and not the physical and mental realm. Now, I'm not saying this is a cure for everything. That's why it's only like 90% effective and not 100%. Um, but there's hope. And that's the thing I want to leave everyone with. There is hope that there is a solution. And that solution is in what I call the prayer of freedom. As you mentioned, Bob, I didn't create it. God kind of revealed it to me. But I would encourage you, if you or a loved one are struggling and you're looking for a solution and nothing seems to have worked and this resonates, go to my website, theprayerfreedombook.com. You'll get information about the book, but what's really cool is I have some live demonstrations where I'm on different shows. I actually guide the host into doing a sample version of this prayer. You'll see people getting rid of anxiety for 26 years, instantly gone. Neuropathy for 15 years, instantly gone. Knee pain from a professional football accident, 20 years plus. And he's actually a galactic energy healer. He can't heal himself. He went through
Oh,
this thing, instantly gone. And you see their expressions, and it's definitely real. It's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And know that there is solution, there is hope, and it lies in just following God's word. And then if you want the book, you can get access to it there. That would be what I would leave people with.
okay, terrific. Well, audience, as always, take what resonates with you and incorporate it into your life and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next
Yes.
time, this has been your spiritual journey.